Practice is an essential part of mastering a skill, whether it's a musical instrument, mathematics, or Mandarin. Well, this is just as true for the MCAT, which doesn't only assess your science knowledge, but also your critical thinking and reasoning skills. As such, MCAT practice exams are a literally indispensable component of your preparation. The only thing is, while many students include MCAT tests in their prep, they're only getting a fraction of the full value out of them because they are missing out on several important practice principles. So to remedy the situation, we've got with us Clara Gillan, an experienced MCAT tutor and 100th percentile test taker with a score of 526. And she's going to show us how to really nail an MCAT practice test. All right, Clara, how important is it to take MCAT practice tests, and how many should students be doing in the time leading up to their test date?
It's really important. Which I know is the answer everyone was expecting, but very, very important. It's absolutely critical. I will tell you, you cannot succeed unless you're taking practice tests. Mm-hmm. And in terms of how many to take, the best number is typically around like 5 to 7.
Wow.
Yeah, so it's a lot, but I would always recommend taking at least 5 and 7, or sometimes a few more if you have a really long study plan. Maybe up to like 10 or so.
Wow, nice. Okay. Well, when you consider that a full-length practice test is like the real MCAT, more than 7 hours long with short breaks, how do you recommend students tackle them? Should they take it like a real MCAT and get it done in one sitting, or portion it out? What's the best approach?
Yeah, so with regard to the actual like practice tests that you plan on taking, like the 5 to 7-ish tests, mm-hmm. You should always take them like the real thing.
Okay.
So so exactly like you said, with sitting down, spending around 7 hours taking this exam, like using the actual breaks that you get, timing it, and that sort of thing. So you should definitely do that. It's the best way to get familiar with like the endurance constraints, or like the taxing nature of this exam, and to get a relatively more accurate score as well. So that's critical. And then of course, if you have access to other practice exams in addition to those like 5 to 7, you can always break those up and take those as individual sections. But you make sure you use your full tests as accurately as possible.
The AAMC full length test, yeah.
Oh yeah, those absolutely are critical to take those like the real test.
Wow. I mean, that's nuts to me. If I think back to like high school and university, the longest exam I think I ever wrote was 3 hours. So it's just like I can't even fathom the psychological strain. It's
crazy. And I mean, almost no MCAT student has ever taken a test this long. Like I hadn't, I had never even come close, like you said. So it's a lot. And that's a big benefit of practice tests.
And that's what students need to remember when going into their prep, is that you are preparing for a marathon and you need to build up your psychological resilience. And so that's why it's so important to take it all in one sitting. To experience that.
Exactly.
One of the most important bits of advice for MCAT prep is that you sit down to a practice exam really early on in your prep. So my question is, what is the value in doing this before you're ready, when you're just going to do badly?
So it actually is surprisingly, like shockingly valuable to take an MCAT practice exam early on. And I know how like terrifying it is, like to feel like, oh, I'm going to sit down, my score is going to be awful, I don't even want to look at it, and I haven't even covered all my content yet, so why would I go down and take an MCAT exam when I'm just going to miss these questions just because I haven't seen the content? And the value is mainly in understanding what the MCAT is like as early as you can. And that includes things like, how long it is, how long it feels, like whether you have timing problems, that sort of thing. But it also includes what a passage is like, and like how much information you see in a passage versus how much information you might need to retain for the questions. And honestly, like I see a lot of students make this mistake and not take a practice test soon enough. And often they end up like they have no idea what passages are like. They end up hyper focusing on details when they go to review the content. And then they get to their practice like exam 2 months later and they're like, what even is this? Like I studied totally wrong.
Yeah. Can you imagine? I can't even fathom like how awful that must be.
It's terrible. And it's so common.
Yeah. All right, so let's talk critical analysis and reasoning skills, also known as the cars section of the MCAT. So considering it's highly unlikely you're ever going to come across the same cars question twice, how can students prepare for them, and what should they be paying attention to?
That is a really good question. A really good question, because I see more and more students like taking practice exams the right way, reviewing practice exams exactly like they should be, but yet it's so hard, even like if you're doing everything else perfectly, it's so hard to review the cars section, and because it feels pointless. Yeah. Right. You might, you're reading a passage again, and you're like, oh, I'm not going to see a passage like this. It feels like, especially when you don't understand the reasoning of the test makers, you're like, well, what good does reviewing this question do me? Mm-hmm. And it's still absolutely critical. So I know this is the advice that you'd expect to hear from me, but still review the cars section, review every single question as thoroughly as you review the science questions. Mm-hmm. And in terms of like what to do, one tip that I highly recommend is to focus not only on like, oh, here's the question and like, here's why the right answer is right, but also focus on why the wrong answers are wrong.
Right.
Because that can provide another avenue into the reasoning. Like sometimes people will be really frustrated and they'll be like, I don't understand why this right answer was right because it doesn't feel perfect. It doesn't feel like the best possible answer. But then if they switch their focus and they think, okay, well, why are the wrong answers wrong?
Right.
It'll be a lot more obvious that the right answer was at least the least bad answer. And they can improve a lot. So that can be helpful.
Right. Okay. All right. So let's say you get your MCAT practice test results back, and I just feel like it's at this point that a lot of damage or a lot of good can be done. So, for example, if a student scores well, they might be lulled into this false sense of confidence and think, awesome, I did so well, no need to review my mistakes. I'm happy with my score. Or others who didn't score well might lose confidence and agonize over what they got wrong. So what's your best advice to students on processing their practice test results?
Yeah. So both of those things happen all the time. And I honestly recommend, at least for like the first like 2 or 3 or even 4 practice tests you take, don't even think about the score.
Okay.
Don't even think about it. Cause like what you said with your first example of, sometimes being lulled into a false sense of security, that happens not just on the like exam level, but also on the section level. Mm-hmm. Where like someone will be like, I took my first practice test ever. I did really well in the psych soc section. So I guess I don't have a problem with that section. So I'm not really going to study it. Mm-hmm. And that's really damaging, because it's like, well, that was one test. Like there's a whole gigantic scope of material that could be tested that wasn't on that test. Mm-hmm. Maybe you just happened to get a good score this time. So if you avoid focusing on the scores at all, at least in the beginning, you can avoid sort of all of those problems. And then, of course, like once you're in the last few weeks of your prep, or maybe 6 weeks or so, taking AAMC practice tests, which have the most representative scores anyway, then you can start using it to be like, okay, am I ready? Am I sort of in the range that I want to be?
Right. I think the important thing to focus on is like, don't treat these practice tests as practice. They're not like, you're not looking at them for validation. They're not there to validate your knowledge. They're there to really, for you to practice your knowledge and to see where you need work and what the MCAT looks and feels like.
Exactly right.
Cool. Well, there are a lot of MCAT practice test resources out there. Which ones should students give priority to?
Ooh, yes. So the AAMC practice tests. So we talked about, I think we've referenced the AAMC already, but they're the test makers. So they actually write the practice tests themselves. They administer it, and so their practice tests are the most representative that you could see of their actual reasoning. Mm-hmm. So like, of course, any practice test you take might be, the content might be basically right. It might be like, testing the right biology or biochem concepts and that sort of thing. But you can't know for certain whether it'll mimic the AAMC's reasoning. So I highly recommend the first 5. If you're going to take 5 practice tests, all 5 should be the AAMC's practice exams.
Right.
And then only once you're going to take more than 5, like maybe if you have, a longer study plan or that sort of thing, you can start looking at what are called third-party resources, which is like not you and not the AAMC. And there's a few companies out there that are pretty good. I highly recommend asking around because a lot of students have thought a lot about this, and there's some really good information online and that sort of thing too.
Well, you got a name drop. Can you give me an example?
Oh my gosh. Well, my favorite, I mean, I used to work at this company and don't anymore. But Blueprint Next Step, they have really good tests. So, and I can tell you from experience that they put a ton of effort into those tests. And that's a nice thing too, like with regard to practice exams, is that you can get a lot of crowdsourced feedback and that sort of thing. Another one that I'm going to pitch heavily is brand new, but I'm actually super, super, super excited about it. But I currently am director of product at Med School Coach, and they just released a full-length practice test, and we are super psyched about it. We put a ton of work into it, and we are working to get that student feedback that I'm talking about. There's companies that have been around for like 10 years, and they have it. We're working to get it from the very beginning, the get-go, and just respond to it immediately. So if you want, responsive, representative practice tests, that's a good place to go.
Brilliant. Okay, finally, are there any other tips or study hacks you have to help students squeeze the most out of their MCAT exam practice?
Yes, definitely. So, I mean, one big one is, I talked about like reviewing the wrong answers in the context of cars, but reviewing like wrong answers. And I don't even just mean like your wrong answers, because everyone knows, if I got a question wrong, I'm going to review it. But even like the wrong answer choices are super helpful, because like the people making these practice tests have put a lot of thought into what the right answer should be and what the wrong answer should be. And sometimes even for like a calculation question, it's like, okay, the right answer was like 20 Newtons. There was a wrong answer that was like 200 Newtons. What sort of mistake could I have made that would give me that wrong answer? And how do I avoid that mistake?
Right.
So that's like a lot of extra effort, but it's worth it.
Yeah. So really scrutinize those tests, your results. Yeah. Okay.
Absolutely.
Great. Yeah. Okay. Awesome. Clara, thank you again so much for giving me all of this great intel. I feel like students now have that knowledge they need to go into taking their practice tests and actually get some great value from them.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Now that's how you take on an MCAT practice test. Where our MCAT superhero, Clara Gillan, is also the director of product at Med School Coach, which offers tutoring and consulting services for students preparing for a career in medicine. So if you could use a helping hand, I really encourage you to check him out. Details below. If you are preparing to take on the MCAT, make sure you get Brainscape certified MCAT flashcards in your corner. We have distilled down and organized the science content you need to know into an awesome collection of smart flashcards, which are proven to help you learn and remember content twice as fast as traditional study methods. Armed with these, you'll keep up that healthy cadence of daily review that is so essential for landing high scores on the MCAT. And for even more guidance, check out the other videos we have on Brainscape's medical channel, including more interviews like this one. And go to our MCAT Academy for free study guides on everything you need to know to prepare for and ace the MCAT. These tools, together with your ambition and hard work, is everything you need to rise to your challenge.